All right, picture this. It's a crisp early morning. The sun's just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a golden glow on everything it touches. A yellow school bus pulls up in front of a large high school, and out steps Colton. He's tall, with dark rock star-like hair that practically screams cool. He takes a deep breath and starts walking towards the school, nervous but ready for whatever high school has in store for him. First period, math with Mrs. J. Colton walks into the classroom, and there she is, a middle-aged woman with dark black hair, looking both strict and kind at the same time. He takes a step forward and says, "Good morning, Mrs. J." She looks up and smiles. "Good morning, you must be Colton," she replies warmly. "You'll be doing math with my assistant teacher, Mr. Dugan," she explains. "Unfortunately, I'm only human, and I can't teach everyone at once. With this being a special education program, I want to be able to give my full attention to each student, but that's just impossible, which is why we have assistant teachers." Colton nods, feeling a bit more relaxed. "I'm used to that," he replies. "I've been in the special education system as a student for a few years now. I don't mind working with him as long as he's nice." Mrs. J's face lights up with excitement. "Well then," she says, "he's in the back of the room at the brown table." Colton follows her gaze and starts walking toward the back of the room. He navigates through the desks and chairs until he spots a brown table. Sitting there is a young man with dark hair, looking focused but friendly. As Colton takes a seat at the table, he has no idea that this math class is going to be unlike any he's ever experienced. Little does he know, he's in for a math lesson he'll never forget. Get ready, because Colton's first day is about to get interesting. And that's where it all begins.
In order to pass high school, you are required to take a consumer management class, so that's what you and I are going to work on in this first semester.
What's consumer management?
It's the math of business. It's the study and math of consumers, such as how much a business may charge for something to be able to make a profit from a product they make, but still putting it at a reasonable price to get consumers to buy it. And you're going to learn all about that.
Colton smiled. "You know, I've always thought about being a business owner one day. When I was in elementary school, I thought about owning my own bookstore, but I trashed that dream once online books became a thing. No one buys physical books anymore. Recently, I've turned my attention to the music business. I would love to be a musician. I want to be the lead singer of a rock band."
Is that why you have long hair?
"Yes, I even write my own songs." This piqued Dugan's interest.
A young man with a thirst for business and independence, he thought. Maybe I can get him onto my side, train him to take over my business in the future, he thought.
Dugan turned back to Colton.
"What if I told you I own a business?"
Colton asked, intrigued. "What kind of business?"
It's complicated. I'm telling you about this because I think that you're a smart young man with potential. We've only been doing work for 20 minutes, and I can already tell you're smart and will accomplish great things in the future. And I can help you accomplish those great things if you join me in my business.
Colton considered the offer. "I suppose that's not a bad idea. What kind of business is it?"
It's complicated. It would be best if I just show you. Let's go into town and I can show you my business at work. I can show you what I do firsthand.
Colton frowned. "Are we allowed to leave the school?"
You are if you're with a teacher. Come on, it won't be that bad. We're just gonna go to the local burger place here in town, where I can show you what I do.
Colton stood up from the table. "Colton, I guess there's no harm in it."
Great, follow me.
Dugan opened the door to the classroom and walked into the hallway.
Dugan walked into the local family-owned burger joint a block away from the school.
"What are we doing here?"
Colton asked, "Are we here to get burgers?" Dugan pulled out a long black machete and snuck up behind a man eating a bacon burger.
He pierced the knife into the man's abdomen as blood began rushing all over the table, the chair, and of course the floor.
Colton gasped. "You're a serial killer?"
What kind of business venture is this?
"Why would you get me involved in this? I'm only 15.
I need a successor, Dugan laughed, and you seem perfect for the job.
You're young, muscular, and you have a spirit for business. What kind of business requires you to kill someone?" Colton cried.
I'll get to that, Dugan said, but first we need to take this body and get out of here. The police will be here soon. I'm not going with you. I'm going back to school.
Colton exclaimed.
Oh no, you're already too deep into this.
Dugan snapped, grabbing Colton's arm and dragging him behind him out of the restaurant. He dragged himself and Colton into an alleyway where he pulled out his machete again. He pointed the machete at Colton's throat.
If you tell anyone about this, I will find you, I will kill you, and I will turn you into my next red shirt. Yeah.
Dugan explained.
First I stabbed someone to death, then I drag their bodies somewhere where I scoop up their blood into a large bucket. From there, I take out a paintbrush, and I start painting their blood onto a white cloth until it becomes a red shirt. Then I sell those red shirts at my own personal clothing store, but why? You could make red shirts some other way, but this way is thrilling, and I need some excitement in my life. Now let's go. We need to get to the abandoned warehouse.
I've been working in for the last few weeks.
How are we going to get there? Well, the next step is to find a getaway car. We'll steal a car from someone. Let's go onto the highway.
With that, he started walking in the direction of the city highway. Colton composed himself and followed behind him. Dugan, the terrifying assistant teacher, walked through downtown Addison until they arrived at a highway.
You see that blue Chevrolet?
Mr. Dugan asked. What about it? Colton asked, gazing at the car. That's the car we're going to hijack, Mr. Dugan exclaimed. Mr. Dugan rushed at the car and pulled a pistol out from his back pocket. With complete accuracy, Mr. Dugan fired 3 shots at the driver's side window, shattering it. Glass flew all over the highway. The driver inside the car began screaming.
What the fuck? Why the fuck would you shoot my car? What the fuck is wrong with you?
Get the fuck out of the car.
Mr. Dugan shouted, reaching his hand through the window and dragging the man out of his car. He threw the man aside onto the road and dragged him and Colton into a forest. Mr. Dugan pulled a steak knife out from his pocket and handed it to Colton. No, I'm not evil. I'll never be evil like you. Stab him.
You will stab him, or I will fail you.
You can't do that, Colton challenged. Mrs. Jackson is the teacher. You're just the assistant teacher.
Oh, yeah? And who is she going to believe, some snot-nosed child or her assistant teacher?
Colton whimpered out in fear.
That's what I thought. Now stab him, or I will stab you.
Reluctantly, Colton walked forward and stabbed the man in the eyeball. Blood rained down all over the forest. Shortly after, the man collapsed against a tree and died.
Perfect.
Mr. Dugan said, picking up the dead body and throwing it over his shoulder.
Now we have 2 bodies. I can make 2 red shirts. Anyways, let's go. Now we can get to the abandoned house.
Dugan opened the door to the blue Chevrolet they had just hijacked and climbed into the driver's seat.
Get in the car.
He ordered.
No, I'm not going anywhere with you.
Colton challenged.
You're just as involved with this as I am. You killed someone, you popped their eyeball, you are the cold-blooded killer of a successor that I want. But if you don't comply, I will go to the authorities, and I will tell them about the murder you committed. Now what's it going to be? Are you with me or are you a pussy?
Dugan started the car.
Here's the plan. We're going to drive down to the abandoned house that I have been staying in for a while and using as my lair. We're then going to unpack the bodies from the trunk and use their blood to make red shirts.
Colton then thought of something.
And how the fuck do you plan to get there?
Colton asked.
We have a car. I will drive us there.
Colton laughed.
Only one problem with that. One of the windows is full of bullet holes since you thought the best way to hijack this damn car was to get the driver's attention by shooting out his windows.
That's not obvious at all, Colton said sarcastically. It's not as if we're going to be pulled over or anything.
Don't worry, I know how to outrun the police. I've done it before.
With that, Mr. Dugan sped down the highway towards the abandoned house. Meanwhile, back at the high school,
Never came back.
Mrs. Jackson, the main teacher, sat at her desk in her classroom thinking, did something happen to them? Later that night, Colton's parents came home from work, but they were surprised when they walked in the house and their son wasn't home.
Hey, have you seen your brother?
His sister took out her earbuds and turned around.
No, he never came home. I thought maybe he was staying at a friend's house tonight.
Their father wasn't convinced. He knew his son wouldn't just go somewhere without texting or calling first. He had a bad feeling about this. At that moment, the house phone rang and he answered it, hoping it would be Colton. Dugan pulled into the driveway of a rundown house. When Colton got out of the car, he immediately didn't feel well. The air was musty. It smelled of wildfires and burning garbage.
What's with the air quality?
Colton asked, choking on his words.
Don't mind that. This is just a really rundown neighborhood. No one's lived here for years. And the 2 people that do live in this neighborhood like to burn stuff a lot.
Colton then looked up at the house and noticed it was in shambles. Dugan then opened the front door and led Colton down to the basement of the abandoned home. Mr. Dugan switched on the light, and Colton got a good look at the abandoned basement. It was a dark room, with one singular light bulb, producing a dim red light, which gave the room an eerie crimson color. In the corner were several buckets, just ready to be filled with blood. On the wall were some paintbrushes that had recently dried, covered in some slight red stains from blood. Dugan threw one of the bodies onto the ground and began scooping out the blood with a large spoon, scooping it into one of the large buckets. Colton watched in horror as he took a paintbrush from the wall and laid a white cloth down on the ground. Mr. Dugan dipped the paintbrush into the bucket of blood and painted it onto the white cloth as if he was making a painting, when in reality, he was making a red shirt. Colton watched until the deed was done, crying the entire time, expressing grief for the person who died. Mr. Dugan then brought out a drying rack, hung it on the wall, and began allowing the shirt to dry.
Now it's your turn.
Mr. Dugan said, throwing the other body at Colton's feet.
Do what I just did.
Colton's father held the phone to his ear. The voice on the other end was that of Mrs. Jackson, the math teacher.
Hello, Mr. Nichols. I'm calling to ask if your son skipped school by any chance. He came to my math class, but shortly after he disappeared.
Mr. Nichols shuddered. No, he never came home today. I thought maybe he could be doing some extracurricular at school. Mrs. Jackson shuddered on her end of the phone. She gulped and continued to speak.
Your son and my assistant teacher, Mr. Dugan, left the classroom and never came back. I fear something happened to them. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's tell the police. Let's put out an Amber Alert for them.
Meanwhile, back at the abandoned house, Colton and Mr. Dugan watched as Colton walked over and picked up a bucket. He then repeated what Mr. Dugan had done earlier.
Congratulations, your very first red shirt. I'm so proud of you. I'm glad you could join me in this evil deed.
This went on for several days. The police searched for Colton and Mr. Dugan, but just could not find a trace of them. Mrs. Jackson and the Nichols family wondered what could have happened to them. Zach and Chris sat in Mrs. Jackson's classroom doing a math worksheet, when all of a sudden a blue van drove into the classroom, destroying a bookshelf, a table, and several chairs.
Can I park here?
The driver slowly climbed out of the vehicle. It turned out to be Mr. Rentz, the orientation and mobility instructor.
I think I know what happened to Colton, he exclaimed. Mr. Dugan took him. They are hiding.
What makes you think that? There's no way my best assistant teacher would commit a kidnapping and go off the grid.
I'm not so sure. I did some investigating, and I learned that Mr. Dugan has been under investigation by the FBI, the CIA, and the Secret Service for a very long time. He is responsible for several murders across the country. We have reason to believe that he is murdering people and then using their blood to make red shirts. His life as an assistant teacher is just a cover-up for the truth.
I think it's in our best interest if we try to rescue Colton. We have to go after him.
That's too dangerous. As much as I love my students, I don't think there's much we can do.
We'll go with you, Mr. Rentz.
No way, it's way too dangerous. I will not allow 2 high school students to go after a supposed cold-blooded killer.
Zach argued back.
Bitch, he's my best friend. We've known each other since elementary school, when on one faithful day, me and my friend Isaac were sitting in a tube on the playground, and Colton asked if he could join us. We thought he was weird and we didn't want him to join us. I told him, no, you stink. He proceeded to fart at us and a friendship was born. We have a bond. It's my job to go after him.
Come on, Zach. Come on, Chris. Let's go rescue Colton. With that, Mr. Rentz opened the doors and Zach and Chris climbed into the back seat. Mr. Rentz started the van and they sped off into the town.
Zach and Chris sat in the van with Mr. Rentz.
Do you know where to look, Mark?
There have been reports of a blue car in the driveway of an abandoned house on W. Waffle Street. I have reason to believe that's where they are.
With that, Mr. Rentz stepped on the gas and they started driving at the speed of light. Within 2 seconds, they arrived at the creepy abandoned house.
Hey, look! There is the blue Chevrolet in the driveway. That means they could be here.
Only one way to find out.
Mr. Rentz then drove full force at the abandoned house, driving the blue van into the basement, knocking down a wall in the process. Holy shit, shouted Mr. Dugan, dropping to the ground. Colton looked up to see the familiar van he loved so much.
Mr. Rentz, are you here to save me?
Mr. Rentz walked out of the van and walked towards Mr. Dugan.
How did you know I would be here?
I know things. Now give back Colton. This is no way to treat a student. Don't turn them into a cold-blooded killer for your sick games.
Never. Mr. Dugan punched Mr. Rentz in the face. They began fighting, throwing multiple punches and slamming each other into a wall.
That does it. Zach, Chris, hand me a Mountain Dew.
How is a Mountain Dew going to help you win this fight? You'll see.
Zach handed Mr. Rentz a Mountain Dew through the window. Mr. Rentz dramatically unscrewed the cap of the bottle and threw it in Mr. Dugan's direction. The bottle made contact with a wall next to Mr. Dugan, and half of the basement exploded.
What the fuck was that?
Explosive Mountain Dew.
Colton then ran towards the van and jumped into the passenger seat, taking his chance to escape the wicked assistant teacher that was Mr. Dugan. Mr. Rentz got back in the van, and the trio of Colton, Zach, and Chris was reunited as they sped out of the abandoned house.